I used to be ashamed of my past and unsure if I'd make it to where I was going. But I knew one thing was for certain. We don't end up where we're going on accident. I've also learned that we can't erase the past or hide from it, but we can learn from it and pass it on to others. So who am I? I'm the definition of a bootstrap girl. Someone who's made the hard choices to pick themselves back up and make something of themselves. And I'm not the only one. My name is Danisha. I'm a mom, a wife, a professor, advocate, queen of my own path, who's overcome abuse, foster care, homelessness, and raising 5 siblings on my own at the age of 24. And eventually I got a PhD. But something that I learned is that I don't know everything. So here on my show, we're going to be bringing in people who know the things that we don't know. Let's get in and learn on the Dr. Danisha Keating Show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dr. Danisha Keating Show. Super excited to have my new friend, Anna here. We're going to be getting back to listening to understand. What this whole conversation is going to be about is sitting at a kitchen table, having a conversation between two friends. We're trying to understand each other, hear where they're coming from, and understand the why behind what they're saying versus yelling, screaming, shouting, or just shutting somebody down. One of the things that we're doing is inviting you as the listener to be the fly on the wall to see how we are going to have this conversation and how we manage it, manage emotions, and manage the hard questions that we get to ask our friend back and forth to understand. So, Hannah, I have you here with me, and the topic we want to talk about today is a little bit what that has gotten a lot of women into a tough. Well, we've gone back and forth. So go ahead, introduce yourself, what you do, and then introduce the topic, and we are just going to go straight in and start talking about it.
All right. So my name is Hannah Bailey. We are a family of 6. I say we because my husband is home with me full time, which I think there are a lot more families that get to have that experience nowadays, especially post-COVID, when a lot of companies realized, oh, we can just like send our employees home and work remote. So my husband's actually a full-time student. Yeah. Whoa, okay. No overhead. And so he is home full time. He chose to be a full-time student right now. So he just started his 4-year degree. We have 4 children, 9, 5, and twin 1-year-olds. So we stay very busy. And I work full-time for a gym. However, I do the mindset coaching and break the barrier of how we approach food, relationships, conversations with ourselves and other people. So I'm not a therapist by any means because I've gone to therapy and I know that therapy is a lot of undoing the past, but I'm more of a let's see what the future holds for us kind of situation and coach, and originally was personal training and whatnot, but I was like, let's adapt this into what is really going on because anyone can do the reps. It's what is in between the reps and why it's not sticking or getting the results that we want. So I do that. You can't see it behind me.
Let me talk about that.
Yeah. I do a little bit of reselling. Oh, go on.
Yeah.
Go on.
Okay. No. So you said that in your personal training, you look at the results to why they're not sticking, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So in that sense, I recognize that there are a lot of mindset shifts in that. So you can have 2 people that go down the same path, have the same diet, same exercise routine. One is getting results, the other one isn't. How is their mindset approaching it? How are they perceiving it? And then is their perception overriding their perspective? And I'm always trying to make sure that perception is not in control when perspective should be. Because if we have emotional control, then our perception, we will understand, is mostly a lie. It's that first instinct. You know, I mean, my husband says I'm like a feral cat. He goes, you'd live forever if you were out in the wild, because instinctually you're a little skeptical. But at the same time, you know your perspective and the goal that's on the other end that you want for yourself, that you are like, okay, this I can trust and follow down that path because I understand what's happening in the environment. It's not, I'm just in fight or flight mode 24/7. I've been there before.
Yeah.
So I don't want anyone to live in fight or flight. But I do have a lot of little income streams too on the side. I've not necessarily always been a stay-at-home mom or I'm a no-income mom. I will say I have always been at home though. So that's a little different. And I'm really excited about the topic today because it's going to look different for everyone, what we're going to talk about. And there's a lot. I will let you kind of ease us into what we're
I'm
going to
like the
get
person who's
into.
like, go. So we're going to be talking about the concept of a stay-at-home, well, not stay-at-home mom, but an at-home
Yeah.
mom.
Yes.
So some people will automatically hear this and already be like, get out of my house, get out of this conversation.
Mhm.
Why are you talking about this? Because
Mhm.
there we're going to dig into it, but I think that there are two sides of the aisle that people tend to go on. So I'm going to have you first take it and
Okay.
just talk to me. What does it mean when you say
Mhm.
at-home mom? What does that mean
Yeah.
to you?
Yeah. For me, it's being present for my children. We do homeschool. We have a small
Mm.
farm. Like I said, my husband's with me 24/7 now, which is something we didn't have. And I think for the opportunity to present itself, I jumped on it because I didn't know it. My husband spent the first 4 years in a
Mm.
different state and across the world with deployments and military life. So I was like, yes, I
Yeah.
want to be around you 24/7. And I might burn out from that in 4 years, right? We're doing this in like 4 year increments
That
of
doesn't happen.
right. I was like, oh, I don't know. Like you said,
Doesn't.
I do
Yeah.
want the space sometimes, and I do hole up. And I think being an at home mom, we have to find a balance. So I am very blessed and
Mm.
lucky to have a job that I can, take my energy and say, I have a purpose. I did look at being at home at first as, am I always going to have a purpose outside of mom? I think there's a big stigma around
Mm.
if you're at home, that's your only identity, you lose yourself. And that's one big thing I coach women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even 60s into of you're not just mom.
Mm.
Just because you're an empty nester now does not mean you have no purpose. You could be living another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Are you going to keep that cycle of guilt and shame that your children have grown up and that was the goal? And now what's for you?
Yeah.
So trying to find that balance, being
Mm.
at home is just a blessing because I recognize how much time I actually have for myself and I know how to maximize my time now instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to make this 20, 30, 45-minute drive into work and I have all these appointments and when am I going to eat? When am I going to go to the bathroom? All those thoughts no longer are in my head because I've understood how to manage my calendar, have other people respect my calendar, respect my space, respect what I've created for myself because I'm not just a chauffeur. I'm not just a cook. I'm not just a maid. I'm not just a
Mm.
homeschooling mom. I'm not just a wife. And I think that there was a little bit of fear of that in the first 4 years of my marriage with my husband because I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to come back from the military and I'm going to be just a wife and he's going to expect XYZ from me. And I don't know if I can fulfill that. We almost divorced because of it because I was like, I don't know if we're going to mesh well. And it has been the best experience ever. So, one thing I can say is no matter whether you're a working mom or an at home mom or both, go and dive in to the thing that is the scariest thing ever because it might surprise you. And if not, you can say, I tried it and I don't
Mm.
like it. Let's go back to what we were doing.
So I think like I've always kind of struggled with this because the way that I was
Mhm.
raised was definitely like the woman's role is inside the home and if you do
Mm,
anything else, you
mhm,
are not honoring your husband, you're not honoring your
mhm.
family, you're not honoring your legacy, you're not honoring being a
Right.
woman. And I live in a state, I live in California, it's
Yeah.
expensive. We have to
Yeah.
have like multiple incomes in our home just
Mhm.
to be able to survive. And
Yeah.
I think that that has been such a battle internally for myself to
Mm.
be like, okay, I've raised my siblings. I had 5 siblings with me and I had
Right.
to go to work. At that point I was a single parent and I
Mhm.
was I was raising them and like I would hear from other women like, "Oh, when you get married it'll change. Don't invest in your education. Like
Mhm.
don't invest in your route because you're just going to give it all
Yeah.
up anyway." And I would literally hear people say that like it's a waste of
Right.
your time as a woman to go get educated.
Mm.
And I think that like it started like an internal battle with myself. Because
Right.
I was just like, well, I have dreams and aspirations. Like, wouldn't a man
Yeah.
want to support that? And I started to date and found that some people
Mm.
did not want that. Like
Yeah.
some men were like, no, you will be a
Mhm.
stay-at-home mom. And it was
Yeah.
there was two sides of the aisle that I was standing on is that some
Mhm.
people praised like that me wanting to go the route I wanted to
Mhm.
go, and then others shamed me
Oh, for
for
sure.
even wanting to work outside of the home. So
Yeah.
if you were sitting with me, like if I was still in
Mhm.
that moment, what
Yeah.
would you say to me? How would you walk me through like that mindset
Yeah.
shift that it's not shameful to work and it's
Yeah.
not shameful to be a mom and work
Mhm.
inside the
Yeah.
home, outside the home, whatever it might be. But what
Yeah.
would you like if I came to you and I was like,
Mhm.
Hannah, someone just said this to me? What would you
Yeah.
walk me through it?
So I will give you the same experience I gave myself. I married into a Pentecostal family. My husband does not practice. We don't assign ourselves to one specific religion, but his mom did work, which is very interesting dynamic considering most of the time that's not common. But I come from a household where my mother did not work. She had a very guaranteed income from generational wealth and they lost all of it, which is really ironic. And so
Oh,
my parents
wow.
were divorced and my dad gave me two options. He was like, you can use my GI Bill that I didn't use because I was in the war, and then they claimed that it wasn't declared enough of an active wartime to be considered. So I said, oh, okay, I'll enlist. And for me, I went and enlisted. So I had a career in college that was paid for. And there are grants now. I would encourage you to look at all of your income options that could possibly cover it,
Mm.
whether it's a grant, a subsidy, a scholarship. There are so many out there anymore. I would say you cannot depend on one thing. My husband has never said to me, and
Mm.
I encourage everyone, if they're dating, to have that hard conversation. You need to weed them out of what is your perspective on this? Because if my husband would not support me and he wanted me to be solely submissive, we would not be in the position that we are in now. And if he didn't support me, I would not submit to him. I was very defiant in our first 4 years of marriage, which is part of why we almost divorced. I was in a place where I thought, I can't depend on you because you're not physically here. Financially, yeah, we're stable, but I have to do everything by myself. So I started to become resentful. And I think a lot
Mm.
of women, when they become stay-at-home moms or even work from home moms, if they don't have a healthy boundary and they don't have communication with their spouse or their partner, whoever, they will end up being resentful. And so I would challenge you
Mm.
to question yourself, is this going to take me down a path of resentment? And is this going to make me think I didn't follow my dreams or I'm settling? Because I see a lot of people go into corporate America and they're like, well, I was encouraged to do all the right things. I have siblings that are doing all the right things: college, marriage, babies. And they keep lacking purpose because they're not finding what lights their soul on fire. I love being a
Mm.
mom. I thought two children would have been enough, and now we have four, and I'm like, what's two more? Like, I love this. I didn't realize how much I enjoyed
Mm.
this because I didn't witness it growing up. And it is very likely
Mhm.
that your upbringing, you're going to want the exact opposite because I always say our trauma defines
Mhm.
us. And we end up
Yeah.
either wanting to go down that path or we follow that path because that's all we know, or we do the exact
Mhm.
opposite because we're going to say, absolutely not. I am better than this. I deserve more than this.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up for it's like, hey, this is something that is stemmed from your trauma or
Mhm.
from your how you grew up. Like it's not always trauma. Sometimes it's just how you
Right.
grew up. But you said
Yeah.
something very I was like, so I wanted to work because so I'm one of
Mhm.
11,
Yeah.
11 kids. And my dad worked, my mom did not, and it was
Mhm.
definitely like women don't go outside of the home. The only thing that
Yeah.
they can do is like work from home. Which is
Mhm.
not a bad thing. Like if that is what you believe, that's fine. If you're
Mhm.
in alignment with your spouse on that in
Right.
your dating life, when you decide that, that's on you
Mhm.
and that's
Mhm.
that's good. But I love that you said like have that conversation while you're dating. Have the hard
Mhm.
conversation up front
Mhm.
to say if I wanted to work or I don't want to work, what
Yeah.
does that look like for us? Because
Yeah.
that does help both people plan. But I
Mhm.
I do see that being a big issue that people just don't talk about is like,
Right.
we have the conversation like, do you want kids? Do you want, this? But the
Right.
two that we don't have conversations on is discipline
Mhm.
and income, like stay at home,
Yeah.
not staying at home. Like what would we do if we're in a situation
Mhm.
where you're only working and I'm not working? Now you
Yeah.
also said that there is this thing that starts to happen is that maybe we start to feel like shame and guilt
Yeah.
for wanting different and wanting
Mhm.
more. But i
Mhm.
do i do see across, we see it everywhere, that it's
Right.
shameful to like want to be a mom or shameful to
Mhm.
want to be a wife. And we see it to where people are like, oh, you don't want that, but then you're like, hey, I actually really have loved it. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what's been so surprising is that for me
Mhm.
as well, with my husband, like we talk about, like we have a really good marriage and we put a lot of time and
Mhm.
effort into communication and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
so many people are like, oh, you're going to hate marriage. You're going to hate it. It's going to be horrible. And the first 7 years
Right.
suck. And it's like, it doesn't have to. It
It
doesn't
doesn't have
have
to.
to. But then I always thought, based because of how I was raised,
Mhm.
seeing like my option to be a mom is going to be like, I'm going to hate it. And I've
Yeah.
actually really, my daughter is 2 and I have loved
Oh.
it so much. And like,
Mhm.
there are hard days. I'm
Oh,
not
for
going to
sure.
lie. Like there are days where I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
but it is that thing where I'm like, I am so proud to be her mother.
Hmm.
I'm so proud to
Right.
have her as my daughter. And it shocks me when I say that word sometimes, like I'm her mother. Like I'm like, oh, whoa, like I'm her mom.
Yeah.
Like I'm her
Yeah.
mother. And I feel like there are a lot of people right now where it's like there is shit, like you can't admit that. Like there's
Right.
like, ew, well, yeah, clearly you're a kid, you haven't hit terrible
Mhm.
threes yet, or like
Right.
whatever, you haven't hit the hard patch.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, like you don't know, but
Mhm.
no, we can
Yeah, it's a
find
whole
joy in
different
it.
feeling. Exactly.
It's so
Yeah.
crazy. And that's where I think you said first off you were defiant. And that
Very.
was where you're like, I'm gonna do it my way. Can
Yeah.
you dig into what does that mean to you? What did
Hmm.
that look like in action? And then
Yeah.
how did that create that resentfulness that you had
Hmm.
when did you notice both of those to go, oh, hold on. This is the
Yeah.
problem.
So it originated because anytime he would come home, there was no communication. And I felt like I was on the back burner a lot. And to be fair, his
Mm,
eyes opened up in how he was managing his time or mismanaging it rather. And he recognized what I was saying I say this is so funny because, like I said, I don't define myself with any specific religion. I was not brought up in any kind of religion. But when I learned to
yeah.
bite my tongue, I realized he started to pick it out because it wasn't my thoughts of me trying to push him to see it. He started to see it for himself. And so communication started to get
Mm,
easier. But I resented him the first 4 years because and it wasn't even him. It was mismanaged and misdirected. I did not control my emotions and I accepted what everyone was saying to me, just like you had said and heard about there being the
yeah.
terrible threes. That people were saying, like, oh, how I could never do that. I could never live away from my spouse and all these
Yeah.
negative things. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm not meant to be with him. And I started saying, like, why don't we
Mm,
divorce and why don't we date around and just like
mm,
separate and all this other stuff. And then it became, that's not actually what I want because then I started to recreate my childhood in my own adulthood, in my own family. And I thought, I can't
yeah.
do that. And so when you
Mm,
recognize and take ownership and you accept, oh my gosh, I'm just recreating a cycle as an adult that I witnessed as a child, I can't do that to my children. And so there was a lot
yeah.
that's where the switch flipped because I recognized my role in the situation. It wasn't just everyone. And I was like, I have to do the deeper work. And I did go to therapy on my own. It was wonderful. And he was a great
Mhm.
person to talk to. And it gave me a lot of perspective. However, I think when I really started to just watch what I was saying and how I was saying it, then the communication barrier, my husband felt heard and he felt like he had a role at home because when he came home, he was like, you've been doing it all on your own. There was just this power struggle too of who's in control? Are we in control together? What does the dynamic look
Right.
like? And so we actually set
Yeah.
ultimatums for one another to make it work and we fulfilled them. And that
Yeah.
sense of accomplishment and success of like, oh my gosh, we can work together as a team was so fulfilling that I thought, wow, we are meant to be together. And then we got pregnant with our
Mm,
twins a year after we set that first ultimatum goal and met it. And I was like, this is so wonderful. Like, look at this reward that we
mm.
have. And I had such a great pregnancy and here we are now.
So I think there's two things I want to talk through. The second thing is probably going to take
Mhm.
longer, but the first thing that I'm hearing you say is like you had an expectation when he came home.
Yes.
He had his own expectation when he came home, and
Mhm.
and I'm assuming that there may have been some emotions of him being like, "Hey, I'm
Oh,
trying
for
to help," and you're
sure.
like, "Back off, I got this." But then also the
Yeah.
same with him, where he's like, "I'm trying to help," and you're like, and he's like, "Hey, I'm done. Like, you don't want me to help. You don't want
Yeah.
my help." I could see
Yeah.
both of those.
Mhm.
Um,
There was also
happening in
a
that
lot of
situation.
Yeah. There was a lot of things where he was like, "Well, I need to accommodate to visiting this person." And I'm like, "They don't visit you." And he wouldn't recognize that. And he kept showing up for other
Mm.
people. And I'm like, "I need you to show up for me." And it
So the
became this
priorities were
the
different.
priorities were
Mm.
so different. And I said, look, I've planned this out. I gave them a date 3 months in advance. If they can't see you on these 3 days out of the next 7 to 10, that I gave them notice to give their employer of like, hey, I just need one day off somewhere in there. If they had like a weird schedule, that's
Yeah.
on them. If they didn't see you as a priority and they don't come to visit you, then there's nothing I can do about it. And finally, it caught
Yeah.
up after 4 years. And then coming home, they still didn't visit. And I'm like, you're only 30 minutes away now.
Mm. That's such a hard feeling, like,
Yeah.
ugh.
Yeah.
That always bugs me. But it is such a different dynamic too, because I've heard this a lot from people who have had their spouses, like if they travel a lot for work
Mhm.
or they are in the military lifestyle or like maybe like the police officer, firefighter, they're
Mhm.
gone for periods of time. So it is that
Right.
communication piece that is like, here's what
Yeah,
I need from you in this time frame
for
when
sure.
you're home. And I think I grew up. So I grew up being told like when your husband comes home,
Mhm.
you don't speak to him for an hour. You take his shoes off.
Mm.
Like, I'm not kidding. You take his shoes off. You give him food. You give him the newspaper.
Mhm.
You rub his feet. You give him an
Mhm.
hour by himself after he comes home from work. And then when he is ready to engage with you, then
Mhm.
you let him speak. And then you're still handling it an hour
Yeah.
by yourself, but you've
Right.
been all at home all day with the kids and
Mhm.
like the chaos. And it was
Mhm.
also like, in addition, it wasn't just like, hey, our house is allowed to be messy.
Mhm.
Like we were really, what was ingrained in me was like,
Right.
the house has to be clean when he comes home. Dinner has to be on the table
Mhm.
when he comes home. His clothes for tomorrow have to be done. So it was this over the top, like everything. Like I understand being gone
Right.
9 to 5. I get it.
Mhm.
I've done it. And I know you come home and you're exhausted, but like
Right.
the hope would be, the expectation in my head would be, and this is where we're going to go with this next thing. The
Yes.
expectation in my head would be like, you're coming home to relieve me and we
Yeah.
worked together on this.
Yes.
But what we tend to do is we don't communicate what that looks like,
Mhm.
or like, hey, I'm going to need 30 minutes to get home, get adjusted,
Yeah.
change out of work clothes,
Yeah.
get something to eat. Like the
Mhm.
communication's not there. So what we do is that
Right.
we start to say it's an unspoken expectation. Plus,
Mhm.
I'm going to make you read my mind. So
Right.
I see I think like what you're saying is like you actually
Mhm.
have to verbalize
Oh,
what
yes.
you need
Mm.
and
Yeah.
say like, hey, I'm not trying to be mean, but if they
Right.
can't figure out 3 days of these days that you're home, when you're
Mhm.
home, like I need you too. Not
Yes.
just you are home and you're gone still. Like I need you here. So if they
Mhm.
can't accommodate to that, then they
Right.
don't see you this time around. Not
Right.
like you can't have friends, but it's just like,
Right.
hey, there's 3 months here that you're home or
Mhm.
a week that you're home. I can't have you gone
Mhm.
for 7 days. Like I want to
Right.
spend time with you. Your kids want to spend time with you.
Right.
We don't want you to be away. So
Exactly.
how give me like an example of like when someone is trying to make somebody read the mind
Mhm.
of what they're thinking, and then
Mhm.
how can they communicate that versus just being
Oh,
like, read it, like
I have
I'm
the
dropping
perfect
hints.
thing. This
I
has
want to
worked for
know.
me and all of my clients. However, you have to use a little bit of
Mhm.
reverse psychology, and I'll tell you how to do that. So, my husband and I used to always be like, I expect you to do XYZ. And he would say, I can't read your mind. And I would say, you've walked past this 20 times. So, after saying, take this out, do this, do whatever, because you would think it would be common sense, common knowledge, I started to, spew it over and over text messages like, did you read my text? And then finally I got to a point, I'm like, how can I get him to hear me and make it his idea? And so I finally said to him, would it benefit you or would you like for me to give you a little bit of a checklist and have it on paper so you can see it? Because I remembered from a while ago when he used to draw, I'm like, he is very much a pen to pencil or paper kind of person.
Mm.
And he is not going to remember something that's just in a text message. I could tell him something and he would forget it, or he would ask me what after he just heard it. So I finally
Mm.
said, how would it best help you to help me? Like, what is something that you would gain from this? And then I also would ask, are you okay with me giving you a list? And that gave
Mm.
him the opportunity to give me permission where he feels like he's in control, but it's really still giving me exactly what I wanted and what I'm asking for. And
So
so,
that's not reverse psychology. Like let's pause there for a second because I
yeah.
think someone's going to hear that and they're going to go, "Okay, so what I need to do is be
Mhm.
like, I don't want you to pick up the shoes that you left
Right,
by."
right, right. So you don't
So
want them to do
what
the opposite. You want them to think that it's their idea.
but what you're
Mhm.
saying is I stopped treating him like a child and
Yeah,
started treating him like an adult and had a
yeah,
conversation of what works
yeah.
for you. Because what works
Right.
for him, he's pen to paper, but you ask like
Hmm.
would it be helpful for me to give
Hmm.
you a list? Maybe
Yeah.
that's not his thing. Maybe he's like, "No, I don't need the reminder. I'm
Right.
just overwhelmed." But it
Yeah.
opened up the conversation
Right.
to be an adult conversation versus a child
Yes.
conversation of go do
Yes.
what I tell you to do.
Yes.
Okay, that I was like, that's not
And
really reverse psychology.
right.
That's literally saying this is the outcome I want. want
Right.
for both of us, because
Yeah.
it's like we both said we want this,
But he
but it's
thinks
the
that it's
outcome that
his
helps us
idea.
both.
Yeah.
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 And
So
that, but
he
you're
gets
treating him like an
permission too.
adult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
loved when I would say, "Are you okay with me doing XYZ?" Because then he feels like he has a role in the decision making. And I think what boils down to is when we do things outside of asking or having that conversation, they don't feel like they have any input or decision making as a team. And so they feel like, "Oh, you're just going to do it
Yeah.
all on your own." And it's fine, you don't need me. Then it starts that conversation of, well, you don't need me to do that. You know how to do it, or you've done it yourself. And then it becomes an argument of who can one up the other because they've done something, or they've gone to pick up groceries 5 times. And then you ask one time, they're like, why? You always do it. You never ask me to do it. And
Mm,
it turns
mm,
into whose role is that? And then it becomes a, why does it only have to be my role? When we have that
mm.
conversation as adults and say, are you okay with me doing it this way? Or how would
Oh,
you
yeah.
do it? And how do you think we should do it? Even if you don't do it the way that they're
Mm.
going to do it, asking, how do you think we should do it?
Yeah. So this brings it, like, is trigger not triggering, but like bringing up something my husband said, is that women, for us, we desire love and affection and like
Yes.
like
Hmm.
we feel appreciated with those
Yeah.
things. Men desire respect. And so
Yes.
in that, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I'm going to respect you by having this conversation.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to weasel you into anything. I'm not trying to manipulate you into
Right.
anything. I'm not trying to make you guilt trip you into anything. I'm
Hmm.
literally going to ask you, like, how do you want me to approach this with you? And then
Yes.
you're also hearing what he said and
Yes.
inputting, not inputting, but like implementing
Hmm.
what he's suggesting too.
Yeah.
So this is where I think that is such a like mind blown thing sometimes, because I think what we hear and what I hear a lot is like men
Hmm.
shaming. Like, I really
Oh,
have
yeah.
heard that, like, oh, you just got to shame and guilt him and use sex to get what you
Right.
want from your husband. And it's just like, that's also the opposite and the
Right.
extreme of just like, you're here to manipulate them, but they're human
Right.
beings too. So
Right.
you're bringing it back down to like this
Hmm.
core of saying, like, hey, for
Hmm.
us, what is going to work?
Right.
Because I think it comes back to where you said, like, you started to get resentful because you would
Hmm.
hear like other people be like, oh, my spouse can't be away like that. Like, that
Right.
doesn't work for us. And well, my husband, and I'm sure you heard this too, like, well, my husband picks up his shoes. Like, did you
Yeah.
ask him? And you're just like,
Yeah.
like, stop.
Exactly.
Like, this is not a shame thing. And I do
Hmm.
think that we get into these really bad gossiping conversations
Oh, for
sometimes with
sure.
people where someone is leaving and they're just
Hmm.
like, well, why did you put your husband down that way? Like, I hate entering those conversations. I'll actually leave the room,
Yeah.
because it's like, I won't poke fun at my husband because he's
Hmm.
amazing and he's a great
Yeah.
man, he's a great dad, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
disrespect him to fit
Hmm.
into a conversation.
Right.
So when you're looking at that resentfulness,
Hmm.
how did you start to feel once you started to have, like you said, like, you felt like he was on your team, but also like you learned to communicate with him?
Hmm.
How long did you start to notice the resentfulness went away?
I think it really
Was it
took that
fast?
first, no, it was not fast. It took that first year because I had a lot of doubt.
Mm,
I said, let's fix our marriage. Let's come together as a team. Let's do this as adults. And I had, like I said, I have a healthy level of skepticism where there's always a safety net.
mm,
But my dad taught me that because he recognized that I didn't have a feminine energy in the home to
mm,
demonstrate and give me an example of what is healthy. I never had a healthy upbringing where I could see a couple work together. Unlike my husband, he grew up in a two-parent household. He witnessed them always showing each other love and communicating. And so I think I envied that and was resentful with that as well. And there's still some like little
mm-hmm.
dabbles of struggle with that. However, his parents have started to really respect our space. At the beginning, they didn't, because I was his second wife and his first marriage failed. And there was just a lot of fear for him, which is fair, and then obviously that
Yeah,
hiccup of
yeah.
trying, almost divorcing, they were like, oh gosh, like this is going to be messy. But when they recognized too that they needed to
Mm,
back off, it gave us time to heal and come together as one. And so
mm,
that first
yeah,
year, I would say isolation from the outside world. It sounds absolutely crazy. We're still very social on social media. We text
yeah,
people, but we really limited our outings because we didn't want to physically hear it. We didn't want that energy that you can just feel, that you can't just turn off and like close the computer or flip the phone over. We did a lot of
yeah,
isolation and it was really healthy for us. And it's just like when you go to therapy and you're like, wow, I never thought of why I am the way that I am. And now it makes sense. And then you start
Mm.
viewing the world differently. And so now we view a lot of things differently because we really dedicated ourselves to what should have been our first year, but it was into our fifth year.
Yeah. So you, because the isolation, what it did was it like
Mhm.
stripped away the voices of everybody
It
else,
did.
the look, even just the look, because sometimes people
The
won't say anything and
looks.
they go,
Yeah. The
and you're like,
looks.
did you put your face away? Put your face. I
Yeah.
was like, I can't. My face just makes
Yeah.
faces. But
It does.
now all of this influences your joy of being an at-home mom. And you
Yes,
said like I do a lot of
absolutely.
different things, and like when people
Yeah.
hear, so let's talk about that, because I think I really want to dig into that, because it's like how
Hmm.
you went from being resentful to like now your husband is a full-time student. Obviously
Hmm.
he served in our country. Also, thank
Hmm.
you both, because that's huge. And like,
Yeah.
thank you. That is a service for both of you, and it's a hard service for both of you.
Hmm.
So how does that, like, how did you see the joy coming back in being at home mom,
Yeah.
and being able to pour into your kids and be
Hmm.
with your husband, and like that's my best friend, like how
Hmm.
like talk to me about that.
So, once we crossed over, I said, you have to hold down a civilian job for at least a year. And that was one of the
Mm,
hardest years because it was isolating, because it was intentional. And then he
mm.
was driving an hour, working 10-hour days, and then driving an hour home. And then the
Ugh,
fifth day would
yeah.
be an 8-hour day. And so I still hardly got to see him.
Mm.
And you,
Yeah, yeah.
you referenced your upbringing of like having meals ready. And my goal was to have meals ready only because that was our only family time by the time he was home at 7 o'clock, eight
Yeah.
o'clock of
Yeah.
okay, but he was so worn down and it
Yeah.
wasn't enjoyable. And I said, something has to change. I said, you've held down a civilian job. Why don't you look for something
Mm.
different that is better
Yeah.
hours and you're home with us more? And so he ended up on a 6 to 2 shift, which was wonderful, or a 6 to 3, something like that. And so he was home with us
Oh,
every day
okay.
by 3 to 4 in the afternoon, and we had the rest
Oh,
of the day
wow.
together. And it was
Yeah.
very flexible. And I'd gotten pregnant with the twins right after he had switched jobs, which
Mm.
was really funny. And I stepped down from
You're
being
like, "Huh."
I was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Because he took a 20-hour pay cut.
Change.
And so he took a 20-hour pay cut and changed his hours. And so I said, we'll just get through it. It's not a big deal. And
You're
then
right. You're like, whoa,
I told my
we'll
boss,
figure it
I was
out.
like, I'm never going to drive into work anymore. It was a 40-minute drive. I said, I have to work remote only. And I said, I'm
Right.
done personal training. He's like, okay, I understand, whatever. And so, you
He's
know,
like, fine.
I just reflect on it and I'm like, we looked reckless. But as I got pregnant with the twins and I was going
Yeah.
through that, he was present for all of that, which he didn't get to be present for with our second daughter, his first daughter, because he was in a
Mhm.
different state.
Mhm.
He was only there for the gender reveal. We
Wow.
went and saw him on a trip when she was 3 months old, and then 5 months old, he deployed,
Mm.
and that was he deployed 2019 December, and then COVID and lockdown. He was on a ship for
Oh.
156 days in the Middle East. And so he got home less than 1 week before her first birthday and got to come home because our state was one of the only ones that reopened and was free from all the bans and everything. So we were very lucky there. And it still gives me chills. I have chills now.
Oy.
But
Yeah.
he, so, getting pregnant with the twins, he really encompassed me getting a lot of rest. And I watched
Mm.
how devoted he became. And I thought,
Mm.
oh my gosh, I want this man around me 24/7 now because he recognizes the role that I have as a mom. And he's now starting to ask, how can I help you? How can I be present? And
Mm.
what do you want from me? What do you need? And at one point, our twins had RSV when they were 3 months old. And I told him, I said, I don't want you to go back to work after this because you've been home with us for 2 weeks. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to figure that out. So he worked for another couple months and then finally walked out one day. And he's been home ever since. So
Mm.
it'll be a year in April that we've been what I consider a full-time family. And so it's been interesting because now I enjoy
Mm.
cooking. I don't feel like I have to cook. I enjoy baking
Mm.
and learning new skills. I enjoy doing the laundry because he gets to witness it and me doing it. And now he has this joy of seeing it, of like, this is what we're creating for our family. We're having fun. We get to laugh. It's not being influenced by the drive into work or our coworkers' attitudes. It's not influenced by
Yeah.
anything else. It's just influenced by getting up in the morning and getting to do what we want to do. For the most part, obviously there
Yeah.
is work and there are
Yeah.
appointments and there are things. He's out, cutting firewood right now. It's going to be sub-zero tomorrow. So
Ugh.
just recognizing,
Sounds
I know,
miserable. Sub-zero.
recognizing the joy in life. And that's just where I
Yeah.
feel like motherhood has been really enjoyable for me, because how can I resent something that is so peaceful? But I also was intentionally isolating and recognizing what is toxic, what is negative in my ear, what is influencing our moods, what do we
Yeah.
have to tolerate? Do we actually have to tolerate it? And if we don't, why are we doing
Mm. That's a really good question. If we
it?
don't, why are we doing it?
Mhm.
So one of the things too, I think we need to point out is, like you have said, like we live on a farm. We
Yes.
obviously, so that means you don't live in the city. So that
No.
means that you have had to also re-budget to say, okay, we're
Oh
going
yeah.
to budget our life to where we're not
Mhm.
having to have
Mhm.
you leave the home. But
Mhm.
something that I always hear, this is the whisper of people like, well, it's not doable. It's like, yeah, in California, you're never going to be able to be on a
Right.
one income family
Right.
living in the major cities. You're going to have to live in
Yeah.
like a far off city that is
Mhm.
not very populated. That is something,
Yeah.
I get that. But
Mhm.
you said, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Like, if it's
Yes.
not something we have to do, why are we doing it? And
Right.
I think that really, that is wisdom right there, because I think some of us are afraid to try something like moving to
Mhm.
a cheaper state, to
Right.
try to live a life that's a little bit more
Mhm.
unplugged. And I
Yeah.
think that, obviously, like I tell my husband, like, yes, we could absolutely leave California, but like this
Yeah.
being that, like, I was in foster care, being that I moved
Right.
like 33 different times, like there is this,
Yeah.
California is my home. And like
Right.
my church family is my home. And that's the only home
Yeah.
I've actually had consistent for the last 15 years. So it's like, I don't want to leave that. And then our family is here on the east
Right.
side. And then, there's those things where it's like,
Mhm.
but if we left, we would lose that. But it's also at the
Mhm.
same time too, like if we weren't making it financially, we need to,
Right.
and we want to have both people at home.
Mhm.
We have to do what we have to do to get there.
Right.
But that, what I'm hearing is like you sat down and strategized together. Like,
Yes.
he's not
Yes.
happy working this job. It's not
Mhm.
that you just had him quit. You found
Right.
alternative income coming into the
Mhm.
house.
Oh,
And
for
that's
sure.
what again, an adult conversation happened where you
Absolutely.
said, okay, if you want to leave that, we have to do these things. If you want to not
Yes.
do this, that we don't really need to do, that's actually probably keeping you away from the house more. We're not
Mhm.
making as much as we would like to make. It's actually
Yeah.
more expensive for you to drive to XYZ.
Oh
So
my
what
gosh, it
if we
was
live
ridiculous.
below our means? And
Yeah.
that is a conversation, like, so how do you guys
Yeah.
like live below the means,
Mhm.
so that way, because I think so many of us are like, oh, we make $100,000 a year, we
Mhm.
spend $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
For others, it's we make $30,000 a year, we spend 30,000.
Yeah.
So what did that conversation look like? Because that also
Mhm.
plays into the resentfulness as well,
Yeah.
when you start to hear how everybody
For
else lives.
sure.
So how did you
Yeah.
cut that voice out and have
Mhm.
the conversation financially?
Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. So I will say, and I am going to preface this, that everything is circumstantial. I cannot determine and
Mm,
define someone else's circumstances. We bought
right.
with really, really low interest rate. We got very blessed. We're on 3.5 acres, but we have 13 acres
Oh
that
my
are already
gosh.
paid off that don't have a house on it. That's to come one day. So you have to be mindful. We are only 40 minutes from Indianapolis, so it's not like we're that far out. We do have a DoorDasher
Okay.
that delivers our groceries to us 25 minutes away, which is
Yeah.
really, it's so worth it. I'm like, I'm not going out, but
Yeah.
like here's me supporting your income.
So
But
you're not in like the boonies somewhere where it's like we're
I
like
mean,
6 hours away from civilization. Like it's like you're an
the
hour away, right?
where our 13 acres is, absolutely. There's only 300 people in that town, so that's why we're not there yet. Like it's a stepping stone. So there's only
but
2,000
it's
in our
not.
town.
Yeah. Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's not that. Oh, that's not